You wake up in a room that smells like boiled leather and stale ambition. It's dark. Not romantic candlelight dark. Not Pinterest mood board dark. No. It's somewhere between dungeon and wine cellar dark. There's a cold breeze coming from a hole in the wall that someone, hundreds of years ago, probably called a window. The blanket you're under is itchy. Coarse wool. The kind that doesn't so much keep you warm as it gently exfoliates your soul. Your name? Irrelevant. Your purpose? Questionable. But for the sake of this waking dream, you are a freshly minted squire in a low-ranking noble house somewhere in England. The year? Let's say 1328, because that's as good a year as any to regret being born without the perks of indoor plumbing or dental hygiene. You're 17. Have no idea what the word cholera means yet, but you will, and your current goal in life is to not die during breakfast. Because breakfast could be anything. Gruel. Turnip water. Bread that's been slightly chewed by a rat, but still technically edible. And you'll eat it gratefully, because nobles eat meat and you're not a noble. Yet. But there's one thing you're clinging to, besides the hope that the boil on your thigh isn't sentient, and that's the glory of heraldry. Yes, heraldry. Those shiny, colorful coats of arms painted onto shields, stitched into banners, and carved into stone with all the subtlety of a midlife crisis. It's not just decoration, no. Heraldry is language. It's medieval emoji, social status, and deeply confusing family drama all rolled into one. And we're going to dive into it. Slowly. Painfully. Like slipping into a cold bath of goat's milk and disappointment. But before you get too comfortable, and before you commit to this peculiar bedtime journey into the world of feathers, lions, stripes, and mythical beasts, you know, the ones your ancestors actually believed were real, take a second to like the video. Subscribe too, but only if you actually enjoy this kind of slow descent into historical absurdity. And drop a comment. Tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's oddly comforting to know I'm keeping people awake in time zones I'll never visit. All right, let's talk about the secret language of medieval heraldry. Because nothing says power like painting a griffin holding a spoon on a bright blue background and expecting people to take you seriously. Heraldry wasn't just about putting a lion on a flag because you like cats. It was a meticulously coded system, filled with meaning, symbolism, rules, and contradictions, so arbitrary you'd think it was a fantasy football league run by feudal warlords. Imagine you're at a battlefield in the mid-13th century. The air smells like sweat, horses, and broken dreams. You can't really see faces through helmets, and nobody thought to wear name tags. So how do you tell friend from foe? That's right, coats of arms. Painted on shields, stitched onto surcoats, that's the medieval version of a jersey, except you die in it, and flapping proudly on banners that are mostly there to be dramatic and confusing in the wind. Let's start with the basics. Heraldry, from the word herald, as in the person whose entire job was to shout things and identify who was who on the battlefield. The heralds were the first hype men of medieval warfare. They kept track of which noble families had which symbols, which patterns were allowed, and who was illegally using a bear climbing a tree when they were only supposed to have a ferret holding a fish. Yes, heraldry had rules. An entire system of what colors could go on what animals meant what, and what weirdly specific backgrounds were socially acceptable. Because if you dared to put color on color, you were basically declaring war on graphic design itself. In heraldic language, colors were called tinctures. And this wasn't just blue or red. Oh no, that would be too easy. You had to say things like azure for blue, gules for red, and sable for black. Because apparently Latin was trendy and everyone wanted to feel like a Roman senator, even if they hadn't bathed in a week. There were two types of tinctures, metals and colors. Metals were gold, called ore, because why not confuse us more, and silver, called argent, which sounds like a high-end toothpaste. Colors included the aforementioned azure, gules, sable, vert, green, and purple, because nothing says royalty like a shade that was made by crushing tiny sea snails into paste. And here's where it gets delightfully annoying. You couldn't put a color on top of another color or a metal on top of another metal. That was considered a design crime. So no red lion on a green background. No gold unicorn on a silver moon. Why? Because apparently visibility was more important than creativity. The medieval world was serious about contrast. Unlike your cousin's wedding invitation. This is called the rule of tincture, and breaking it was the heraldic equivalent of wearing socks with sandals to a royal banquet. Sure, you could do it, but people would whisper. Now, on to the shapes. Called ordinaries because apparently medieval people liked calling things the exact opposite of what they were. These included stripes, crosses, chevrons, yes, like the gas station, and bends, which are basically diagonal sashes, like you're going to a very violent prom. Each shape had meaning. A chevron, for instance, symbolized protection and was often granted to those who had built churches or fortresses. A pale, just a vertical stripe, meant military strength. Because nothing says fear me like a stripe. Then there were charges. Charges are the symbols placed on the shield, the actual content of your medieval Instagram post. Lions, eagles, dragons, mythical beasts, religious symbols, tools, body parts, yes, really, and occasionally vegetables. I'm not making this up. There are legitimate medieval coats of arms that feature beasts. Lions were by far the most common, because every noble wanted to be associated with bravery, strength, and the tendency to roar at things that annoyed them. Eagles came in second, majestic, dramatic, and prone to being drawn with far too many wings. Unicorns? Totally real. In heraldry, anyway. And if you wanted to seem mysterious and divine, but also kind of unhinged, you slapped a unicorn on your banner and went to war. And let's not forget the griffin. Half lion, half eagle, and entirely made up. But powerful. Very powerful. Especially if you liked the idea of mythological surveillance with claws. But it wasn't just animals. No, heraldry was also a game of puns. If your family name was Carpenter, you might have a hammer or saw on your arms. If your name was Foxley, you'd probably have, wait for it, a fox. This was called canting arms, and it was a form of visual dad joke. Like medieval wordplay, except it was stitched into your funeral robe. And don't even get me started on the helmet designs. Different helmets indicated your rank. A closed helmet? You're a knight. Open-faced? Probably a noble with money and no regard for arrows. Helmets turned to the side? You're fancy. Helmets facing forward? Either you're a monarch or you're just really bad at following fashion trends. Above the helmet? The crest. Which wasn't always an actual crest. Sometimes it was a goat. Sometimes a dismembered hand holding a sword. Sometimes a bird vomiting fire. Why? Because medieval people were both imaginative and extremely bored. Now let's not forget the motto, the little phrase scrawled underneath the shield that was supposed to inspire fear, respect, or mild confusion. Things like Fortis et Fidelis, brave and faithful, in Deo speramus, we hope in God, or my personal favorite, non sans droict, not without right, which sounds like something you'd mutter under your breath after stealing someone's parking spot. And sometimes, you didn't even get to pick your motto. If you were part of an order, like the Order of the Garter, you inherited a motto whether you liked it or not. In the case of the Garter Knights, their motto was Honi soit mal y pense, which loosely translates to, shame on him who thinks evil of it. Which sounds noble, until you realize they were basically defending a piece of lingerie. As you can see, heraldry wasn't just a bunch of random colors and animals slapped onto a shield. It was a carefully curated identity system, designed for the illiterate elite to tell each other apart during battles, tournaments, and awkward family feuds. And of course, it was also about legacy. Your coat of arms wasn't just yours, it was your entire family's brand. Passed down. Modified. Marred by bad marriages and scandalous affairs. If your cousin married a rival house, suddenly your majestic lion had to share space with an ostrich holding a horseshoe. Tragic. And don't worry, we're just getting started. We haven't even gotten to the absurdity of heraldic visitations, the chaos of false arms, or what happens when a king starts handing out symbols like candy to people who don't even own socks. But we'll get there. One tincture at a time. For now, let the fire crackle softly in your imagination. Let the scent of oiled leather, horse sweat, and mildly rotting turnips lull you deeper into your blanket cocoon. You're wrapped in history, cloaked in absurdity. And we're only at the tip of the heraldic iceberg. Sleep, noble squire. For in our next chapter, you'll be summoned to a tournament, where banners fly, helmets gleam, and nothing goes according to plan. You wake up to the sound of trumpets. Not pleasant, melodic fanfare trumpets. These are more like badly tuned metal kazoo trumpets, blaring at the break of dawn, as if the entire castle staff decided sleep was a sin punishable by fanfare. Your straw mattress crunches beneath you like a sack of regret, and your back feels like it's been lovingly beaten by a sack of potatoes in the night. The room smells like unwashed wool, oiled chainmail, and the faint musk of terrified horse. You sit up, bleary-eyed, your tunic twisted and sticking to your back like a medieval slap in the face. Your boots are by the door, still wet from yesterday's rain, which somehow smells like mold and peasants. Today is a big day. No, not your birthday. Those aren't celebrated unless you're royalty or miraculously survived the plague. Today is a tournament. A grand, boisterous, wine-drenched public affair where men in armor attempt to murder each other politely in front of an audience. And you, humble squire of Sir Reginald the Somewhat Brave, are going to be in the thick of it, carrying lances, adjusting straps, fetching water, and praying to 5 different saints that no one drops dead before lunch. And this tournament, this theater of bruises and broken ribs, will be your first real encounter with a living, flapping, posturing pageantry of medieval heraldry in action. The castle courtyard is alive with sound. Hammering, horses neighing, the rhythmic clunk of iron on stone. And above it all, the chattering murmur of people pretending they're more important than they actually are. You shuffle into your too tight boots and follow the smell of roasted onions and stress toward the lists, the jousting field, bordered by bright pavilions and enormous, ostentatious banners that look like they've been designed by drunk peacocks with access to fabric dye. Heraldry is everywhere. It's on shields, surcoats, banners, tents, and even the butt flaps of certain noblemen's horses. There's a lion rampant on a red field, a wyvern coiled like a snake around a tree, an armored fist clutching a daisy, which feels like mixed messaging. These symbols are shouting over each other in a riot of color and symbolism, each one demanding attention like an insecure teenager on a TikTok livestream. And of course, every single noble insists their arms are older, purer, and more legitimate than everyone else's, even though half of them were probably invented last Tuesday by a cousin who once saw a goat and called it divine inspiration. You, carrying a helmet that smells like expired beef stew, can barely keep up as your knight, Sir Reginald, struts across the field like a man whose shoulder pads are doing all the talking. His coat of arms? A silver boar on a black field with 3 golden stars above it, meant to represent strength, night hunting, and some convoluted family story about an ancestor who was once bitten by a pig and survived. This is where heraldry really shines, not in the still, dusty books of armorial rolls, but here, in the sweaty theater of noble egos. Each knight lines up for the joust, their banners flapping proudly in the breeze like medieval billboards. You've got Sir Baldwin of Arches, whose arms feature 2 cross keys over a blue chevron. He claims descent from a holy gatekeeper. More likely, his great-grandfather got drunk and locked himself in a monastery one time. Then there's Dame Isabel of Hyphon, a rare lady juistu with arms showing a white crane standing on one leg, surrounded by reeds and, yes, tiny frogs. Her motto reads Sola et fuma, meaning alone and steady, which is also how she holds her lance, with terrifying precision. And there's Lord Humbert the Overfed, whose arms feature a pie, 3 golden goblets, and a Latin phrase that definitely translates to glory through gluttony. The tournament begins with great pomp, which in medieval terms means lots of yelling, poorly timed music, and someone definitely dropping a trumpet. A herald steps forward, robe billowing, scroll in hand, voice hoarse from too many previous heraldings. He reads off the names and titles of each knight, including their full list of honorifics, which takes approximately 12 minutes per person. Sir Reginald of the House Trumplethatch, Warden of the Northern Stream, Tamer of the Slightly Angry Donkey, Bearer of the Argent Stars, Son of Gawain the Moist. You stop listening around Donkey. Then come the fanfares, the waving of handkerchiefs, and finally, the violence. Jousting. Glorious, splintering, bone-rattling jousting. Horses gallop, lances lower, and everyone watching pretends they understand what's happening. When a lance hits its target, ideally the shield, but often the chest, it shatters into satisfying splinters. And for a moment, everyone forgets about the lice and the gout and the economic instability of feudalism. Heraldry plays a crucial role here. Without it, everyone would just be vaguely shiny blobs on horses. But with those vibrant colors and dramatic symbols, you can tell exactly who just got launched off their saddle and into the cabbage cart. Between matches, you run errands for your knight, mopping blood off armor, tightening straps, refilling wine goblets that shouldn't be refilled during combat, but absolutely are. And the more time you spend near the noble's tent, the more you overhear. Did you see Lord Evram's new crest? A raven with a human face? Utterly tasteless. The Viscount of Mulgrave's motto used to be in French. He changed it to Latin just to sound educated. My cousin married into a family that bears a dolphin rampant. A dolphin. Honestly, how aquatic. That's the thing about heraldry. It's not just decoration. It's politics. It's propaganda. It's petty family gossip wrapped in metaphor. You don't bear a lion because you're brave. You bear a lion because your great-grandfather wanted to seem brave and paid a herald to make it official. And in these tournaments, heralds act like referees and gossip columnists combined. They note every symbol, every banner, every scandalous breach of heraldic law. If someone dares to wear a design they haven't earned, if they put a dragon where there should be a cross, the herald will call them out faster than you can say false lineage. You even spot a dispute unfold before your eyes. A young knight, Sir Odric, barely 20, armed with too much ambition and a banner that looks suspiciously like the Earl of Grimsby's, marches out proudly with a silver griffin on a field of purple. Grimsby himself, a much older, much drunker man, storms into the field in his undertunic, waving a copy of his own banner and shouting something about family honor and copyright infringement. The heralds swarm in. There's shouting. There's pointing. There's Latin. Turns out, Sir Odric's griffin faces left instead of right. This, in heraldic terms, is enough of a distinction to avoid a duel. Barely. But the heralds still fine him with a loss of prestige and a mandatory redyeing of his entire tabard, which, given how expensive purple dye is, might ruin him. You, watching this unfold with a bucket of warm water and a stale bread roll in hand, begin to understand the real power of heraldry. It's not about lions and stripes. It's about control, legitimacy, reputation, the ability to stand on a battlefield or a tournament ground and say, "This is who I am. This is my blood. This is my house. Respect me, or at least pretend you do while I wave a sharp stick at you from horseback." As the sun begins to set over the tournament field, casting long shadows across broken lances and dented helms, you help your knight limp back to his tent. His armor is scratched, his ego slightly deflated, but his banner still waves proudly beside him. That banner, stitched with stars and a silver boar, flutters in the evening breeze like a tired but determined symbol of identity. Tomorrow, someone else will wear it. Perhaps you. Perhaps your child. Perhaps someone who buys it off you for a few pennies and a potato because war is expensive. And as the torches are lit and the drunken nobility begin their night of wine-soaked bragging, you finally get a moment of peace. The sounds of the tournament fade into soft murmurs. The heralds rest their voices. The banners fold. You lie down beneath the tent flap, shield tucked under your arm like a pillow made of disappointment. You close your eyes. You dream of lions dancing with unicorns, of golden stripes on blue fields, and of crests that don't involve birds on fire. And you wonder, what does your own banner look like? What beast would represent you? What colors, what metals, what strange and deeply personal motto would you choose? Tomorrow, we'll go deeper. Into the family trees. The armorials. The heraldic visitations. The bureaucratic fever dream that kept noble families in a constant game of who has the oldest goat on record. But for now, sleep. Let the crackle of distant campfires lull you into stillness. Let the banners wave quietly in your mind. You wake up to parchment. Not metaphorically. Literal parchment. It stuck to your cheek. Someone spilled ink on it during the night, and now your face bears a faint sketch of a rampant stag and a note about the color azure. Congratulations. You've been branded by bureaucracy. Your mouth tastes like dried onions and regret. There's a small, sad beetle in your bowl of last night's barley stew. You eat around it. The sun is already too bright for your soul, and the trumpets are already too loud for your eardrums. Welcome to the heraldic office. Yes, there's an office. A very serious one. With quills and candles and angry men in robes who argue over whether a lion passant gourdant should have its tongue sticking out or not. Spoiler, it should. That tongue is everything. Here, inside the stone-walled echo chamber of heraldic legality, dreams go to die in triplicate. The moment you step in, your feet crunch over a floor littered with scrolls, wax seals, and the powdered remains of a biscuit that someone tried to eat during a meeting last Thursday. A herald named Osbert greets you with a scowl that implies he hasn't slept since King Edward was in short pants. He's wearing robes so heavy they could double as blackout curtains. His desk is covered in open rolls, labeled with names like the Scrope v. Grosvenor Chronicle of Misery and the Black Book of Nobility, volumes I through 9.5. This is where the real action happens. Not on the battlefield. Not in the tourney lists. But right here in the soul-sapping, ink-stained trench war of noble paperwork. So before we dive into today's stack of parchment and petty grievances, take a moment to gently smack the like button with your medieval gauntlet. And if this delightful descent into heraldic hell is your idea of entertainment, go ahead and subscribe. But only if you're into this sort of thing. Really. No pressure. And drop a comment telling me what time it is for you and where you're watching from, because somewhere out there, someone is dozing off to this in New Zealand while someone else is rage-knitting in Manchester. Right. Back to the scrolls. First up, a dispute over tinctures. Tinctures are the colors of heraldry, and there's a whole sacred system about how to use them. They fall into two groups, metals and colors. Metals are gold, ore, and silver, argent, and colors are red, gules, blue, azure, green, vert, black, sable, and purple, purple. There are others, but they're rare, weird, and generally discouraged, like that one cousin at family gatherings who brings up astrology and owes everyone money. The golden rule, pun mildly intended, is that you do not put a color on a color or a metal on a metal. Azure on sable? Absolutely not. It's considered heraldic heresy. Like putting ketchup on a steak or using Comic Sans on a tombstone. But of course, everyone breaks the rule. Osbert shows you a case from 1379 involving a knight named Sir Geoffrey of Marshbottom, who flagrantly placed a red dragon, gules, on a blue field, azure, and was promptly dragged through the mud in the court of arms. His defense? The dragon was very fashionable. Which, to be fair, it was. But heraldry is not a place for fashion. It's a place for arbitrary rules enforced by middle-aged men with calligraphy fetishes. Next up, the armorial rolls. Think of them as medieval yearbooks for the upper crust. These massive scrolls contain illustrations of every noble family's coat of arms, painted lovingly by people who almost certainly had arthritis and no healthcare. Some rolls are practical. Others are so lavish they make modern Instagram influencers look modest. You unroll one and find the arms of the Fitzurse family, literally son of the bear, featuring a cartoonishly angry bear standing on its hind legs, clutching a bloody sword. The bear is wearing a crown. Beneath it, the motto, Non timid Ursus. Fear not the bear. This was meant to intimidate, but it mostly comes off as overcompensation. Across the scroll from them are the de Troc family, 3 golden ducks on a silver field. Their motto? Comi super flumen. Calm upon the river. They're clearly the kind of people who ask to speak to the manager of fate. Each time a new noble family was granted arms, it had to be recorded, approved, and documented with excruciating precision. A clerk would sit, usually in some dusty chamber full of beeswax and size, and sketch out the design in ink, annotating every detail. 2 chevrons counterchanged. A bend sinister sable. A griffin regardant vomiting stars. And heaven help you if someone already had similar arms. Heraldic disputes were real, messy, and occasionally violent. Like the Scrope versus Grosvenor case, 2 powerful families with almost identical coats of arms, blue with a gold bend. It dragged on for 13 years. That's longer than most medieval marriages. And in the end, a whole council of heralds decided that only Scrope could keep it. Grosvenor was told to go find a new symbol, preferably one that didn't look like he was cosplaying someone richer. These disputes were serious because heraldry wasn't just decoration. It was legal identity. Your arms were your passport, your driver's license, and your branding all rolled into one. In battle, it told allies not to stab you, ideally. In court, it told people you were a somebody. And in marriage contracts, it told your in-laws that you weren't marrying their daughter with a fake name and a forged pedigree. Which brings us to the visitations. Sounds pleasant, right? It's not. Beginning in the 16th century in England, but rooted in earlier practices, heraldic visitations were like audits for nobility. Teams of heralds would travel from county to county, knocking on manor doors and asking, Hello, are you really noble? Please show us your paperwork, your family tree, and your banner. If you couldn't prove it, you were told to stop using your coat of arms. In some cases, you were fined. In extreme situations, your arms were literally erased from the rolls, a sort of medieval unfollow button, but with significantly more shame. These visits were deeply unpopular, partly because they exposed centuries of lies. Many families had simply started calling themselves noble and drawn up a coat of arms one day after a particularly flattering dream. One man claimed descent from a crusader knight, but the heralds traced his family to a fishmonger named Ralph who once fell into a well. Not exactly the same vibe. You look around the heraldic chamber and see it all: hundreds of scrolls, cracked seals, faded ink. Every scrap of parchment tells a story, not just of symbols and animals, but of egos, ambitions, lies, and the human need to mean something, to be something. And let's not forget the actual heralds. These weren't just bureaucrats. They were historians, linguists, negotiators, and, frankly, medieval nerds with way too much power and not enough hobbies. Some took their role with deadly seriousness. Others, like Osbert, clearly longed for death, but will settle for alphabetizing the de Montforts. Each herald had a title: Rouge Dragon, Blue Mantle, Portcullis, and other names that sound like Dungeons and Dragons characters who got sidetracked into tax law. The chief among them was the Garter King of Arms, a title so pompous it might as well come with its own hat made of goose feathers and self-importance. These heralds were the final arbiters of arms, and their decisions shaped noble identity for generations. They were gatekeepers of legitimacy in a world where blood, birth, and banner determined your entire life trajectory. And you? You're just trying not to spill ink on a 200-year-old document about a goose and chainmail. As the candlelight dims and the room grows colder, Osbert leans back with a sigh that carries the weight of 50 generations of misplaced sigils. He hands you a scroll and says, "File this under F. For foul allegory, dubious." You curl up by the fire with a sheaf of heraldic disputes as your pillow and dream of lions with 6 wings, dragons chasing their tails, and a squirrel in full armor holding a battle standard. Sleep well. We'll be back tomorrow, with more scrolls, more scandals, and, eventually, the complete breakdown of heraldic language itself. Because if you think all these animals are weird now, just wait until the 14th century invents blazon. You wake up inside a glossary. You are the glossary. You become a sentient, exhausted list of adjectives, colors, and verbs that all mean angry lion doing something oddly specific with its feet. Someone nearby whispers rampant regardant, and you burst into tears. That's right. We've reached the part of medieval heraldry known as blazon. Not blazing, like a fire, though your patience will be. Blazon is the secret incantation of the heraldic priesthood, a formulaic way of describing coats of arms using a language so precise, so particular, so needlessly dramatic, that even a wizard would ask it to tone things down. Think of blazon as the Google Translate of the medieval world, except it only goes from picture of lion to absurdly overwrought Latinish description of lion. And there's no translating back. For example, take a coat of arms with a golden background, a red lion standing on 2 legs, tongue out, tail curled like it just smelled something awful. A herald wouldn't say, "Gold background, red lion." No, he would say, or, "A lion ramping gules, armed and long dasher." Translation: gold background, red lion. The claws and tongue are blue. Because of course they are. And yes, long means as a tongue. We are now assigning verbs to body parts. Welcome to blazon, where everything has a name and nothing is allowed to be normal. But before we plunge headfirst into this sea of semi-Latin despair, take a second to do something beautifully modern. Like this video, subscribe if you're strangely into suffering with a historical theme, and drop a comment with your current time zone and what beverage you're using to endure this. Tea, wine, warm milk, or something stronger, I don't judge. I'm here with you. And so is the unicorn rampant sinister affront, probably screaming into a void of grammar. Right. Back to the language of blazon. At its core, blazon is about sequence and hierarchy. You start with the field, the background color. Then you describe the principal charges, the big fancy animals or symbols, then any secondary charges, smaller things floating around for dramatic effect, and finally the positioning and attitude, what they're doing and where they're facing, because even a hedgehog can be Staden Gourdan sinister. Let's break this down like it's a medieval cooking recipe. Field, this is your background. Pick a tincture, or gold, argent, silver, gules, red, azure, blue, sable, black, or vert green. If you're feeling bold, maybe purple, which screams I am royalty and also deeply insecure. Charge, the main object or creature. Could be a lion, a fleur-de-lis, a cross, a porcupine, a pair of scissors, or, yes, a snail. Because what's more intimidating than a snail? Answer, literally anything. Attitude, what is the creature doing? Heraldry has a word for everything. A lion standing up is rampant. Walking, passant. Sitting down like it's reading a sad poem, segent. Lying flat like it's done with life, couchant. Looking backward with a smirk, regardant. Upside down and spinning, probably made up, but someone's tried it. Attributes, tongue out, longed, claws colored, armed, wearing a crown, crowned, wings out, displayed, breathing fire, statistically rare, but still possible. Here's a real example from an actual coat of arms. Azure, a unicorn salient argent, armed, crined and unguiled or gorged with a coronet composed of crosses petit and fleurs-de-lis, chained to the last. Now breathe. That's a blue background, a silver unicorn jumping up like it's trying to reach the top shelf, with golden horn, mane, and hooves, wearing a fancy neck piece and a gold chain, presumably to keep it from joining a punk band. Why are the fleurs-de-lis there? Because medieval people couldn't design anything without including at least three. You may be wondering, why so complicated? Because heraldry, like most old European institutions, is secretly just gatekeeping disguised as tradition. If everyone could just describe their arms by saying yellow with some red birds, then the illusion of nobility would collapse faster than a trebuchet made of cheese. Blazon is the elite's way of proving they're educated, literate, and deeply annoying. But wait, it gets better. Or worse. Probably worse. The language of blazon is intentionally not English. It's a Frankenstein blend of Anglo-Norman, Latin, French, and sheer masochism. It's the same reason why legal documents say henceforth pursuant to the party of the first part instead of just Bob. It's meant to sound official, intimidating, and like it belongs in a dusty manuscript guarded by a librarian named Brother Gerald who smells like radishes. And the rules are rigid. The order of terms matters. The difference between a cross argent fimbriated gules and a cross gules fimbriated argent is the difference between silver with a red outline and red with a silver outline. Get it backwards and congratulations, you've just insulted an entire lineage. The positions are even more bonkers. For animals. Rampant equals standing on hind legs, usually roaring at God. Passant equals walking, like it's late for church. Statent equals standing, unsure why it showed up. Segent equals sitting, probably judging you. Couchant equals lying down like it just heard the inheritance went to its cousin. 4 birds. Displayed equals wings out like it's making a dramatic entrance. Volant equals flying midair, probably fleeing its responsibilities. Rising equals just starting to fly, possibly by mistake. And then there's attest, back-to-back, respectant, facing each other, and combatant, fighting, which is how most noble marriages ended anyway. Let's talk unusual charges. Because medieval heralds didn't stop with lions and eagles. Oh no. The longer heraldry stuck around, the weirder it got. Why settle for a boring old dragon when you can have a fish with antlers, a man's severed leg in armor, bent at the knee, spur intact, hello, Isle of Man, a human heart with a crown on it, a ship in full sail being attacked by swans, a pair of red hands, disembodied, floating ominously. Each of these has a story. Some of them are noble. Others are the result of artistic overreach and too much mead. And then there's canting arms, a pun-made visual. These are coats of arms that literally picture your name. If your name is Foxley, you might have a fox. Baker, 3 loaves of bread. Calthorpe, probably some Thorpe. That's a village. You're welcome. These were either charming or ridiculous, depending on how pun-happy your family crest designer was. Heraldry also has its own grammar. You don't say a red lion. You say a lion gules. You don't say blue and gold. You say azure and or. And you don't say, this makes no sense. You say, I am unworthy to question the sacred art of blazon. A well-trained herald could visualize a coat of arms just by hearing its blazon. This was considered a sign of professional excellence. or deep, irreversible madness? Possibly both. As you sit in the flickering light of a sputtering tallow candle, trying to untangle the phrase quarterly profess indented or in gules, in Dexter Chief a mullet argent, you feel your soul slip slightly out of your body. It floats above, reads the line again, and immediately returns to ask, are we being punished for something? Probably. Because if you've made it this far into the labyrinth and catacombs of heraldic vocabulary, you're either asleep, under duress, or one of about 5 people left on Earth who finds this genuinely exciting. Hi. Welcome. There's tea in the back. Tomorrow, when your brain has recovered and the candle wax in your ears has cooled, we'll continue. Because the language of heraldry isn't just used to describe coats of arms. It was used to design entire systems of fake authority, noble power, and family legacy. And next, we enter the funhouse mirror of heraldry spread across Europe, its national quirks, and what happens when French nobles, German barons, and Spanish kings all get access to lions, unicorns, and way too many color options. You wake up in a hall of mirrors. Except the mirrors are all shields. And every single one has a lion on it. Or an eagle. Or a lion eating an eagle. Or 2 eagles fighting a lion with a suspicious number of tongues. Congratulations. You've entered the European arms race. Not that kind. There are no missiles here, just an unholy number of heraldic beasts, blinding metallic backgrounds, and families so insecure about their lineage that they needed 5 helmets and a dancing bear on their coat of arms just to prove they mattered. This is what happens when heraldry gets exported beyond its original medieval English sandbox and starts going fully international. Which, as history proves, is always a delightful disaster. When the Normans first brought heraldry to England, it was still relatively tame. Lions, crosses, fleur-de-lis, maybe a fancy bird if you were feeling spicy. But the rest of Europe took that basic starter pack and said, what if we added antlers? And dragons? And more lions? So before we dive into a steaming pile of Slavic serpents and Teutonic overcompensation, take a second to tap that like button. Subscribe if this video is helping you gently spiral into medieval-themed slumber, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what hour of night you've given up on sleeping like a regular person. It's oddly comforting to know someone in Lisbon is listening to this while eating cereal in despair. Okay, strap in. Heraldry's going to get aggressively continental. Let's start with France, the home of subtle arrogance and 12 million fleur-de-lis. French heraldry is basically the haute couture of European coats of arms. Elegant, symmetrical, and always concerned with looking more noble than their neighbors. The classic royal French arms? Azure, that's blue, because we're fancy, with 3 gold fleur-de-lis. It's the visual equivalent of sipping wine while looking down on someone else's cheese selection. Originally, it had a lot more fleur-de-lis. Like, just absolutely drowning in them. They eventually simplified it to 3, probably because the full set looked like someone sneezed into a golden daisy field. The fleur-de-lis itself? A stylized lily. Allegedly. It also looks like a trident, a pitchfork, or a tiny alien spacecraft, depending on your level of sleep deprivation. It's supposed to represent purity, the Virgin Mary, and absolutely zero chill. But the French weren't just about lilies. They loved lions, too. But only if they were incredibly well-dressed. You see, French lions don't just rampant. They rampant fourche. That's right, fork-tail. Because 2 tails are better than 1 when you're trying to scare your enemies and confuse your tailor. Then we have Germany. Oh, Germany. German heraldry is the equivalent of overthinking something until it becomes terrifying. They didn't just put a lion on a shield. They put 7 lions on a shield, gave them all names, then placed that shield in the belly of an imperial eagle with 2 heads, a crown, and a deeply traumatic backstory. Let's talk about the double-headed eagle, a heraldic abomination that symbolizes I'm watching you from both directions. It became the symbol of the Holy Roman Empire, which, fun fact, was not holy, not Roman, and barely an empire. This eagle was supposed to represent dominion over both East and West. But mostly it represented the inability to commit to a single head, or perspective. German coats of arms also loved complexity. While the English might settle for a red lion on gold, the German nobility would go with something like quarterly, 1st and 4th sable of Griffin Segrient, or 2nd and 3rd per pale argent and gules of Ben counterchanged. Which is heraldic for, we inherited too much land, too many titles, and our family tree is a tangled bramble of guilt and intermarriage. Now for a scenic ride south to Spain and Portugal, where heraldry went full telenovela. Spanish coats of arms are dramatic. Bold colors, religious iconography, lions with severe eyebrows. You'd often see castles symbolizing Castile, lions for Leon, and sometimes pomegranates. Yes, the fruit. The Kingdom of Granada used it. Because nothing says I will conquer your village like a sweet, tangy snack. The Spanish royal arms eventually turned into a mashup of all the kingdoms they absorbed, leading to shields that looked like a fridge covered in magnets from every tourist destination. Portugal? Very into shields on shields. Like, you'd have a big shield. And inside it, 5 smaller blue shields. And inside those, tiny silver dots, representing coins or wounds or the national debt, depending on the mood. Portuguese arms also featured a red border with golden castles. Because why not? More borders equals more legitimacy. That's the rule. Drifting north again, let's take a mild existential panic detour into Scandinavian heraldry. You might assume that the Vikings would have terrifying coats of arms, skulls, axes, blood, dread. But no. Once Scandinavia got civilized, their heraldry went surprisingly minimalist. Sweden? Blue and gold. 3 crowns. Simple, elegant, slightly IKEA. Norway? Red background. Golden lion. Holding an axe. That part tracks. Denmark? 3 blue lions, looking confused, surrounded by hearts. Yes, hearts. They're technically called semi of hearts, but don't let that fool you. Those are full-on Disney Valentine shapes. It's as if Denmark wanted to say, yes, we may conquer your land, but with love. Even Finland, whose heraldry showed up late to the party, managed to look fearsome. Their coat of arms has a lion holding a sword in one hand and stomping on a curved saber with the other. Which raises questions. Like, how many hands does this lion have? What happened to its self-respect? Heading east, we stumble gloriously into Polish heraldry, which said, you know what? Screw lions. Give me a giant eagle and make it white. Poland's white eagle is a thing of beauty. Spread wings, golden beak and talons, crown floating above its head like it just won a medieval reality show. It's majestic, proud, and likely judging you. Polish noble families, the Szlachta, had unique heraldic traditions. 4 multiple unrelated families could share the same coat of arms. Imagine showing up to a party and realizing 5 other people are wearing your exact outfit, and you're all fine with it. That's Polish heraldry. Communal. Confusing. Kind of wholesome. And then there's Hungary, which had the most suspicious coat of arms imaginable. Red and white stripes. A cross with double arms. A crown floating over hills. It's beautiful. Also looks like it's hiding something. Meanwhile, Italy was the Wild West of heraldry. Every city-state had its own rules, its own colors, and its own ancient feuds. Florence? A red lily on white. Venice? The winged lion of St. Mark, often holding a book. Because even your lion should be literate. And of course, the papal coat of arms. 2 cross keys symbolizing the gates of heaven and a big fancy tiara. It's the kind of symbol that says we love forgiveness and also global influence. Heraldry in Eastern Europe, like Russia and the Balkans, tended toward Byzantine grandeur. Think golden eagles with more detail than a cathedral ceiling, saints holding swords, and backgrounds so ornate they make a Faberge egg look humble. Russia's double-headed eagle was borrowed from the Byzantines. Because what's better than one eagle head judging you? 2. In full imperial regalia. With orbs. And scepters. And very poor boundaries. So what happens when all these wildly different traditions collide? Chaos. Absolute, gloriously confusing chaos. By the late medieval period, coats of arms weren't just for war. They were used in treaties. Stamped on coins. Woven into tapestries. Slapped on churches. Plastered on wine bottles. If you had a noble title and a pulse, you had a coat of arms. Probably 5. Some monarchs had arms so complex they required diagrams. The arms of the Habsburgs, for instance, look like someone tried to quilt the history of Europe while blindfolded. Lions, castles, eagles, stripes, flowers, severed limbs. It's all there, forming a deeply unstable family tree held together by inbreeding and Catholic guilt. And yet, all these arms still followed the basic rules of heraldry. the tincture laws, the blazoning language, the impossible grammar. Even if you added a badger with a monocle standing atop a rainbow, there was a way to blazon that mess. Because ultimately, heraldry was never just about pictures. It was about identity, about history, and about showing off how many relatives you had that didn't die in suspicious hunting accidents. Next, we're going to take a brief nap in the dusty annals of symbolic meaning. What did all these colors, beasts, and weird little geometric patterns actually represent? Why was blue considered noble? Why was red both brave and also kind of murdery? And why were peasants not allowed to have cool dragons? Get comfy. The symbolic logic of heraldry is coming next. You're in a dimly lit scriptorium now. The air smells like old parchment, ink made from crushed bugs, and the faint, judgmental sweat of a monk who's been sitting for 10 hours straight illuminating a giant manuscript with gold leaf and resentment. There's a massive scroll rolled out before you. It's covered in symbols. Lions, stars, stripes, frogs, maybe. You're not sure. They all look vaguely aggressive or religious or both. A man in robes is trying to explain what it all means, but he's speaking Latin. And you're still trying to figure out why everything smells like wet goat. Welcome to heraldic symbolism, the part of the story where we pretend everything had deep meaning, when really, let's be honest, it was probably just someone shouting, "Put a griffin on it, Harold." Griffins are cool. Now, if you ask heraldic scholars, and yes, that's a real job, somewhere, they'll tell you that medieval coats of arms followed an elaborate system of symbolic color theory, animal psychology, and deeply meaningful pattern usage. In other words, medieval mood boards. Let's start with colors, or tinctures as the professionals call them, because color wasn't complicated enough. There are two main types, metals and colors. And if you're thinking, well, isn't metal also a color? Congratulations. You now know more than half the people who design coats of arms. There are two metals, or gold, usually shown as yellow, which stands for generosity, elevation of the mind, and potentially being the favorite child. Argent, silver, shown as white, representing purity, truth, and the haunting fear of tax collection. And then, 5 standard colors. Gules, red, the color of warriors, courage, and low impulse control. Azure, blue, for loyalty, truth, and sadness about the lack of indoor plumbing. Vert, green, symbolizing hope, joy, and possibly moss. Purple, for royalty, sovereignty, and people who spend too much on dye made from snails. Sable, black, representing constancy, grief, and that one cousin who always wore too much eyeliner. There's also tenny, orange, and murrey, a weird reddish mulberry color. But those are like the cilantro of heraldry, controversial, confusing, and often avoided unless you're trying to start something. Now here's the weird part. Medieval folks had rules. Actual color placement rules, because obviously it would be a sin to have your battle standard look like a toddler's art project. Rule number 1, never place a metal on a metal. So no gold lion on a silver background. That's basically visual blasphemy. Rule number 2, never place a color on a color. So no red boar on a green field. Unless you're French, or rebellious, or just didn't care, because you were very rich. The idea was contrast. You wanted things to be visible from a distance, on a battlefield, at a tournament, or when you were dramatically storming out of your family estate over inheritance drama. Then come the ordinaries, basic geometric shapes used in heraldry. These are the ancient ancestors of clip art, and no, they didn't mean ordinary as in boring. Just standard. Though yes, most are shaped like things you'd find on a medieval flag or stuck in someone. There's the pale, a vertical stripe, the fess, horizontal stripe, the bend, diagonal stripe, and chevrons, pointy roof shapes that scream I own land. There's the cross, obviously. The religious icon that got stapled onto everything from shields to baked goods. There are approximately 400 cross variants in heraldry, all pretending to mean slightly different things like devotion, crusading, or I would very much like to stab a Saracen. Then we have the salter, diagonal cross, the pile, a triangle that looks like it's falling, and lozenges, diamond shapes that allegedly meant honesty. But let's be honest, most people just thought they looked fancy. But now, we get to the good part. The beasts. The animals that made heraldry the medieval equivalent of an RPG bestiary. Because in a world without personality quizzes or Instagram bios, you put your deepest character traits into an animal on a shield and hope for the best. Let's start with the MVP of medieval heraldry, the lion. If heraldry had a top 40 chart, the lion would be on it 12 times, in different poses, with a remix featuring eagles. Lions meant bravery, nobility, strength, and probably an allergy to subtlety. They came in multiple flavors. Rampant, standing on one hind leg with both front paws up, looking like it's about to demand a raise. Passant, walking politely, one paw raised, like it's mid-catwalk. Siegent, sitting. Tired, probably done with all this. Dormant, sleeping, or as the heralds described it, at rest. So basically you, right now, listening to this. Then we have the eagle, the second favorite flex in medieval iconography. Eagles stood for strength, courage, and being the corporate logo of every empire that ever overreached. The double-headed eagle? That's when you want to say, I'm majestic and paranoid. I see you coming from both sides. Bears were a little rarer, but symbolized strength, ferocity, and woodland tax evasion. Boars were weirdly popular. A boar wasn't just dangerous, it was stubborn. Killing a wild boar was considered a real feat, which makes sense because they're basically armored pigs with rage issues. A boar on your shield said, I will fight you in a swamp and I will win. Deer, or stags, represented peace, harmony, and probably vegetarianism. But if the stag had antlers and was in a pose like it just heard something suspicious, it might also mean vigilance. Dragons? Oh yes, dragons were the nuclear option. They meant power, wisdom, and that you read way too many Arthurian legends. Surprisingly rare in early heraldry, but they picked up popularity in the late medieval period, probably because people finally stopped worrying about whether dragons were real and started using them as metaphors for don't mess with me. And then there's the griffin. Half eagle, half lion, all insecurity. Griffins were the overachievers of the heraldic world. They guarded treasure, symbolized divine power, and absolutely refused to go quietly. A griffin said, yes, I'm half cat, half bird, and yes, I'm better than you. Other creatures? Unicorns, purity, mystery, and repressed romanticism. Wyverns, dragons, but cheaper. 2 legs instead of 4. Medieval discount serpent. Martlets, birds with no feet. Representing constant motion, noble ambition, and no time to sit down. Pelicans, bizarrely common. Especially the pelican in her piety, which shows her pecking her own chest to feed her chicks with blood. Yes, that was a real thing. Medieval people thought that was adorable. Let's not forget fish. Dolphins, in particular, were popular, not because they're cute, but because medieval people thought they were a type of sea monster. True story. And snakes? Less common. But if you saw one, it meant cunning, rebirth, or someone trying to be edgy in a religiously questionable way. There were also inanimate objects with deep, possibly imaginary meanings. Keys, authority and guardianship, usually featured in papal arms. Swords, obvious. Scythes, not death, weirdly. Just agriculture. Though let's be honest, still ominous. Crowns, moons, suns, stars, wheat sheaves, cups, anchors, and chains all used. All symbolic. All heavily dependent on who was interpreting them and how much wine they'd had. Which brings us to the next great mystery. Did people actually know what any of this meant? Answer, sort of. Maybe. Not really. For the average knight, these symbols were just branding. Ways to say don't stab me, I'm on your team. Or do stab me, but only if you're French. Sure, heraldic manuals explained all the meanings. But they were written by nerds in cloisters and royal courts. Not by guys wearing chainmail and worrying about dysentery. So when you see a 13th century knight with a black bear holding a gold star on a red field, you might assume it means courage in adversity under the eye of heaven. But really, it probably meant, my dad liked bears. And I wanted to match my saddle. So much for cosmic significance. That's the beauty of heraldry. It pretends to be an exact science. A symbolic language with rules, structure, and centuries of tradition. But really, it's a glorious mess. An art form where the lines between meaning, fashion, ego, and pure chaos blur until all that's left is a lion doing a handstand in front of a golden tree, while a unicorn stares disapprovingly. Coming up next, let's get down to the gritty, miserable, occasionally bloody business of making a coat of arms. Who got to have one? What was the process? Why did people fight about it like it was the final round of a medieval reality show? You wake up in a tent. Not a nice canvas camping tent. Oh no. This one smells like damp wool, boiled leather, and a suspicious number of turnips. You're lying on a straw-stuffed mat that crackles every time you move. There's a tapestry flapping in the wind outside, except it's not a tapestry. It's a banner, and it's covered in a weird-looking golden lizard wearing a crown. The man sitting beside you, his name is probably Reginald, is sharpening a dagger and explaining, in excruciating detail, how his great-great-uncle twice removed on the maternal side earned that lizard emblem during the siege of somewhere you've never heard of in the year 1183. You nod politely, because what he's really telling you is, I am important. My family is important. And you, good sir, are sleeping on straw. Welcome to heraldic gatekeeping. Now, contrary to popular myth, not everyone in the Middle Ages had a coat of arms. That would be like saying everyone today has a yacht. Coats of arms were exclusive, selective, and most importantly, political. It wasn't about being noble or brave or especially fond of unicorns. It was about status. And if you didn't have the paperwork to prove it, you could take your peasant hands right off that paintbrush. Let's break it down. In the earliest days of heraldry, say the 1100s, coats of arms weren't formally regulated. They just kind of happened. A knight might paint a symbol on his shield to identify himself in battle. A lion, a cross, a spooky bird doing jazz hands. No one cared. You were covered in mud anyway. But as tournaments became more fashionable and warfare became less of a disorganized mud wrestling contest and more of a horrifyingly expensive hobby, heraldry became serious business. People started recognizing coats of arms not just as battlefield identifiers, but as hereditary property. That's right. You could own a color scheme. You could inherit a unicorn. Your descendants could fight over whether it was rampant or couchant in court. So, who got to have one? In the beginning? Knights. Real knights. The kind who wore armor, had vassals, paid taxes, and occasionally stabbed people for a feudal overlord. But then, things got messy. Because along came the heralds. You remember heralds, right? Medieval professional gossip mongers with clipboards and an unhealthy obsession with whether your eagle had one head or two. By the 13th and 14th centuries, heralds were becoming official. Kings employed them. Nobles paid them. They began compiling rolls of arms, basically medieval Instagram feeds for shields. And suddenly, heraldry had rules. Rule 1, you couldn't just make one up anymore. At least not without someone checking first. Rule 2, you couldn't use someone else's arms. That was theft. And in some places, an actual crime. Yes, people went to court over whose lion was fluffier. Now here's where things get petty. Say you were a minor noble with no land but a healthy ego. You might try to invent a coat of arms and hope no one noticed. But the heralds? They noticed. You might get accused of assumption of arms, which is basically heraldic plagiarism. You'd be summoned to a court of chivalry, yes, that was a thing, and forced to defend your squirrel on a checkered field against some baron's 300-year-old badger. If the court found your arms too similar to someone else's, you might have to change them. Publicly. That's like being forced to repaint your car because someone in France says they had that shade of blue first. In England, heraldry got especially bureaucratic. The College of Arms, established in 1484, began running visitations, door-to-door inspections of noble families to see if their arms were legitimate. Yes, heraldic tax audits. Imagine it. You're a gentleman of minor estate. Your dining room features a lovely painted crest with a phoenix eating a bagel. A herald shows up, opens his giant dusty book, sniffs disapprovingly, and says, "I'm sorry, sir, but you're not phoenix material. You may qualify for a pigeon." By the 16th century, things had reached heraldic saturation. Everyone wanted a coat of arms. Merchants, lawyers, goldsmiths, fishmongers. And the crown, never one to pass up a good shakedown opportunity, began selling arms. Yes, you could buy them. For a modest fee, plus bribes, probably, you could be granted an official coat of arms. The language in these grants was glorious. It might read something like, "Whereas John of London, being of good stock, upright behavior, and commendable wealth, had requested the lawful right to bear on a shield of argent, a goose or in flight proper, accompanied by 3 spanners sable. We do grant and assign unto him and his heirs forever this most noble bearing. Translation: John is rich. John paid. John now owns a flying goose. Of course, this caused controversy. The old guard, actual knights who'd bled in wars, resented the nouveau riche parading around with lions and stars and flaming meteor hammers. They saw it as cheapening the art of heraldry, diluting the power of the unicorn. To which the crown replied, "That's adorable. That'll be £20. Now, if you weren't granted arms, but used them anyway, you could be fined or publicly humiliated. But here's the real kicker: enforcement was uneven at best. Half the time, no one knew who was allowed what. Coats of arms got copied, altered, embellished, distorted, and reinterpreted so many times that even heralds would throw up their hands and mutter something about divine will. This chaos gave rise to differencing, a system of marking changes between similar arms to denote younger sons, cadet branches, or just drama. For instance, a second son might add a label, a little bar with hanging tabs. A third son might add a crescent. A fourth might just quietly cry into his barley porridge and take up the priesthood. And women? Yes, they had heraldry too. Sort of. Unmarried women bore their father's arms on a diamond-shaped shield, because apparently normal shields were too masculine. Married women displayed their arms impaled with their husbands, which means the two were squished side by side on the same shield, not violently murdered together. Just heraldic marriage symbolism. Very uplifting. If she was a widow, she might bear her husband's arms on a lozenge bordered in black. Which, again, sounds tragic and tastes like a cough drop. There were rules for clergy, too. Bishops often used a mitre or crozier in their arms. Cardinals got to include hats with ridiculous tassel counts. And popes? They got keys. Big shiny metaphorical keys to heaven. Do not lose them. The arms of guilds, cities, abbeys, colleges, and kingdoms were an entire side quest in themselves. You could spend hours arguing whether the arms of the worshipful company of fishmongers were too similar to those of the worshipful company of eel enthusiasts. And someone did. In a manuscript that you can probably still read. But perhaps the strangest part of all this? Even though heraldry was about status, birth, bloodlines, honor, people lied about it constantly. We have entire books from the Renaissance where noble families literally made up ancient ancestors just to justify their arms. They'd write things like, "Our family crest, featuring a golden chicken devouring a basilisk, was first borne by Sir Aloysius the Valiant in the year 900 during the Battle of Flaming Goose Hill." No one questioned it, because they couldn't Google anything, and everyone was exhausted. So, who got to have a coat of arms? Originally, warriors. Then landowners, then people with money, then, eventually, anyone with enough money and the ability to forge a decent backstory. It was less about what you did, and more about how good you were at pretending your family had always done it. Coming up next, we'll look at the grand designs themselves. Not just what they meant, but how they were made, who painted them, and why 14th century horses had better outfits than most of us. You wake up in a workshop. It's dark, smoky, and smells like a mixture of egg yolk, old parchment, mildew, and something suspiciously metallic, probably the blood of a goat that insulted the king. There's a medieval artisan sitting cross-legged on the floor, muttering to himself in Norman French, while grinding up bits of lapis lazuli with the same intensity most people reserve for revenge. Welcome to the production line of medieval heraldry. You might be wondering, as you lie there in a pile of horsehair and discarded brushes, how did people actually create these things? Those vivid, screaming red lions, the golden zigzags, the peacocks doing acrobatics on checkerboards, all those designs that seem so crisp and confident on 800-year-old tombs, someone had to physically make them. And no, it wasn't the knight himself slapping paint on his shield between battles. These were crafted by professionals, painters, metalworkers, embroiderers, scribes, masons, and in some cases, extremely bored monks with access to too much pigment and not enough social interaction. Let's start with the shield. Medieval shields were often made of wood, sometimes linden, poplar, or fir, anything lightweight enough to carry but strong enough not to explode on first impact. Then came a layer of gesso, a chalky white gluey mix, then canvas, and finally a coating of plaster or more gesso, because nothing says I'm ready for battle like 5 coats of art school primer. On top of that went the painted design. And let's be clear, this wasn't your average Crayola project. These artists were mixing natural mineral pigments by hand. Red? That was vermilion, made from mercury and sulfur. Toxic, but vibrant. Perfect. Blue? Usually ultramarine, made from crushed lapis lazuli imported from Afghanistan, more expensive than gold, and almost guaranteed to ruin your finances and your marriage. Green? Verdigris, made by soaking copper in vinegar and letting it corrode. Because nothing says medieval glam like chemically induced decay. Gold and silver? Real. As in, actual powdered gold leaf and silver leaf, applied painstakingly by hand and then burnished to shine like your future debts. They painted these onto the shield with natural brushes, often made from squirrel hair, hog bristle, or even bird feathers. Some paints were mixed with egg yolk to make tempera, which hardened into a nice matte finish and, incidentally, made your equipment smell like a breakfast buffet for the undead. And this wasn't just for looks. Heraldry was your identity in battle. In a world without uniforms, radar, or friendly fire prevention, you needed to scream, "Don't stab me, I'm on your side," as loud as possible, visually, at least. So everything had to be big, clear, recognizable at 200 feet through a dust storm, under a visor, while being trampled by a warhorse. Hence the obsession with contrast, gold on blue, red on white, black on yellow. No subtle gradients, no soft pastels, no tasteful minimalism. This was medieval warfare, not a Pinterest board. Now let's talk about the surcoats, banners, tabards, standards, and horsebarding. Because why stop at a painted plank of wood when you could turn your entire body into a walking flag? The surcoat was a cloth tunic worn over your armor, often emblazoned with your arms. Think of it as a medieval jersey, but longer, heavier, and 80% more flammable. These were usually made of wool or linen, and if you were rich, maybe silk. They were hand-sewn and dyed, sometimes embroidered with metallic thread or beads if you were very fancy and had absolutely no plans to actually fight anyone that day. The tabard was similar, often worn by heralds and messengers. These came in bright, unmistakable colors so people could spot you across the field and say, "Ah yes, here comes a person with no combat training and very important gossip." Banners were a separate business entirely. A banner was a square or rectangular flag with your arms on it, hung from a horizontal bar. It didn't flutter in the wind so much as announce itself. These were paraded around during battles, tournaments, feasts, coronations, or just random Thursdays, and were made from high-quality fabrics, because again, you weren't poor, you were just pretending not to be taxed. Then there was the standard, a long, tapering flag used by nobles and military commanders. Standards didn't carry a full coat of arms, but rather badges or symbols associated with your family, plus a motto like "Never yield, with God's help," or "Try not to die today." But the real star of the fashion show? Your horse. Yes, your horse had a better outfit than you did. Full barding. That's cloth armor with heraldic symbols all over it, custom fitted like a medieval prom dress. Matching colors, matching design, probably lined with more fabric than the average peasant ever saw in their life. If your horse didn't look like it was attending a royal wedding, were you even nobility? The horse also wore a caparison, a decorative covering that went from nose to tail and sometimes included embroidery, fringe, and custom ear flaps. Not for protection. Mind you, this was pure medieval flexing. Look at my war horse. Her name is Buttercup, and she wears gold thread. You, meanwhile, are sweating through 5 layers of wool in July and wondering why your squire keeps fainting from mercury fumes. Speaking of squires, they were the ones doing a lot of the prep work. Your 14-year-old apprentice would wake up before dawn to polish your shield, iron your surcoat, rethread your banner, repaint chips in your arms, and make sure the correct lion was facing the right direction. If he got it wrong, you'd be mistaken for the wrong knight. If he got it very wrong, you might be executed for impersonating royalty. No pressure. And just when you think you've got it all memorized, your tinctures, your divisions, your beasts, someone changes the rules. Because heraldry was not static. It evolved. Over time, new animals were added. New lines. New symbols. Entire family crests were modified after major events, like marriage, inheritance, conquest, or spite. So a lion might gain wings. A cross might sprout additional arms. A star might become a flaming star. A sword might be set on fire, stabbed into a heart, then surrounded by lilies, because someone was feeling things. These changes weren't always officially recorded. They were sometimes passed down through oral tradition, copied incorrectly in manuscripts, or reinterpreted by artists who had no idea what they were looking at. That's why two knights from the same family might have slightly different arms, and why some poor 18th century genealogist is still crying into his wig. But it didn't stop there. There was also funeral heraldry. Because yes, your death got heraldry too. You couldn't just die like a commoner. Your coffin had to be draped in a painted banner. Your escutcheon, shield-shaped display, hung above the altar. Your helmet, gauntlets, and sword were often mounted on your tomb, just in case the afterlife needed visual cues. And speaking of tombs, those full-body brass engravings of knights in cathedrals? They're basically the medieval version of LinkedIn. Sir Geoffrey de Bravestone died 1349. Fought in 3 wars. Owned a dog. Had impeccable taste in griffins. Meanwhile, your coat of arms would be carved into stone, painted onto walls, embroidered onto kneelers, and repeated in every possible medium until the local stonemason's hands were too arthritic to function. So, in summary, heraldry wasn't just a design. It was an entire industry. A collaborative fever dream of artistry, symbolism, hierarchy, and passive-aggressive embroidery. Every lion told a story. Every color screamed about legacy. And your horse? Your horse had its own stylist. Next, we'll dive into what all those animals actually meant. Why were so many people obsessed with lions? What was the deal with griffins? And why did everyone want their personal snake to look vaguely murderous? You wake up in a thicket of beasts. Not literal beasts, though at this point, you wouldn't be surprised if a flaming goat with a crown wandered in, but the painted, snarling, squinting kind that decorate every surface of the medieval world like a Royal Lisa Frank sticker pack from the 9th circle of hell. There are lions, so many lions, rearing up like they just got some bad news. Griffins with the confidence of Jim Brothers' eagles mid-scream. Bears with PTSD. Unicorns pretending to be shy but definitely armed. And dogs. Very, very loyal, very judgmental dogs. Congratulations. You're now inside the brain of a medieval herald. It's a strange place. And while all these animals look like the result of a drunken taxonomy contest, each one meant something very specific to the people who slapped them on their shields and banners. Or at least, it used to mean something before 4 centuries of intermarriage, bastard branches, and desperate attempts at clout turned heraldic symbolism into an overcooked soup of guesswork. But let's try to make sense of it anyway. So before we dive face first into this medieval zoological fever dream, do me a small favor. Like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy listening to me explain why a pelican is vomiting blood on a 12th century flag. And drop a comment letting me know what time it is, where you are, and what country you're watching from. It's always amazing to see this strange, sleepy little community from around the world. Okay, let's talk about animals. Fake, real, and possibly imaginary. Let's start with the king of heraldry, the lion. This guy is everywhere. In heraldry, the lion is basically the main character, the Beyoncé of beasts. Why? Because he was considered the embodiment of courage, nobility, and general don't mess with me energy. Except, medieval Europeans had never actually seen a lion. So what you get are these long, wiggly creatures with manes like exploding spaghetti and paws like flower arrangements. Sometimes they have human expressions. Sometimes they look like very angry cats who just found out their food bowl is empty. In heraldic terms, lions come in more poses than a fashion model with a sore back. Rampant. Standing on one hind leg, 4 paws raised, classic ready to claw your soul pose. Most common. Passant, walking, with one paw up like it's considering where to step next. Statant, all 4 paws on the ground, usually pretending to be calm. Siegent, sitting. Because even lions need a break. Dormant, sleeping, because you're tired of roaring at everything. Oh, and if the lion has 2 tails? That's a lion Q4she. Basically a mutant lion. It meant extra power, or please fear me more. But lions weren't alone in this symbolic safari. Let's discuss the griffin. The griffin is half lion, half eagle. Front half, eagle. Back half, lion. 0% understanding of how anatomy works. In heraldry, the griffin symbolizes strength, watchfulness, and total fantasy nonsense that looks cool. It guards treasure. It defends the dead. It's majestic, terrifying, and has claws for days. If a lion said, "I'm fierce," the griffin said, "Hold my beer." Some versions had wings, some had ears shaped like leaves, and others had tails that looked like aggressive ferns. But they always had the expression of someone judging you for your poor lineage. Next up, the unicorn. The unicorn. The medieval version of a moral panic. It was a symbol of purity, innocence, and dangerous levels of virgin-related propaganda. See, unicorns were believed to be untamable except by a virgin maiden, which tells you more about medieval anxieties than any sermon ever could. In heraldry, unicorns were often chained, yes, chained, as a weird flex to show that their power had been tamed by virtue or divine right. So if you see a chained unicorn, that's not just decoration. That's a statement: I control dangerous holiness, thank you very much. The unicorn's horn, incidentally, was believed to neutralize poison. Which is funny, because people were constantly getting poisoned anyway. So, maybe don't trust the unicorn. Speaking of distrust, let's talk about the wolf. Wolves in heraldry represented ferocity, cunning, and loneliness, basically the medieval version of your misunderstood antihero. They weren't as popular as lions because, unlike lions, people had actually seen wolves and knew they were mostly dirty, hungry, and likely to steal your chic. But if you wanted to imply you were clever and terrifying in a Night Stalker kind of way, the wolf was your go-to. On the opposite side of the vibe spectrum, you've got the hound. Yes, the dog. A symbol of loyalty, protection, and snooty competence. Greyhounds, in particular, were popular, sleek, noble, fast, and just snobby enough to be impressive. A knight with a dog in his arms? That's not just a mun with a pet. That's a statement: I am faithful. I am true. And I can afford to feed an animal that doesn't work. Then we get to the eagle. If the lion is king of beasts, the eagle is king of birds. In heraldry, it represents sovereignty, nobility, and I will screech my way into your nightmares. Most commonly, the eagle appears displayed, wings outspread like it's performing an interpretive dance about the futility of life. Sometimes it has two heads, like the double-headed eagle of the Holy Roman Empire. This meant we control both East and West, which is adorable considering how little control they actually had. A two-headed eagle is also the medieval way of saying we are complicated without needing a family therapist. Now, let's spice things up with a boar. The boar represented bravery, fierceness, and an inability to quit while you're ahead. Boars were notorious for fighting to the death, even when outnumbered, outmatched, and on fire. If you bore, pun intended, a boar on your arms, you were basically saying, I will run directly into danger and ask questions later. Meanwhile, the stag or deer was more nuanced, a sign of peace, purity, and regal behavior. Unless the stag had 12 antlers and was dripping blood in a field of swords, then it meant I am noble and traumatized. Let's not forget the bear. The bear was a symbol of strength, ferocity, and childhood trauma, especially in Northern Europe, where bears were part of legends and local lore. Heraldic bears often stood upright, sometimes muzzled to imply controlled strength. Other times, they were just vibing, swiping at enemies or licking their paws like it was an ASMR video. Now for the bird nerds, the martlet. This is a stylized bird with no feet. Seriously. In heraldry, the martlet is always in flight, symbolizing perpetual motion, restlessness, and you will never own land because you're the fourth son. Yes, it's true. In English heraldry, the martlet is commonly used to denote the fourth son of a noble family, someone who didn't inherit property and just had to float through life. Which brings us neatly to mythical creatures. Because if lions weren't weird enough, there was the wyvern, a dragon-like creature with 2 legs, wings, and a really bad attitude. And the cockatrice, half dragon, half rooster, 100% bad idea. Also the hydra, the salamander, and the harpy, each symbolizing things like vengeance, transformation, or I read way too many medieval bestiaries while sleep-deprived. And of course, we must mention the pelican. In heraldry, the pelican is often shown pecking its own breast, drawing blood to feed its young. Medievals believed this bird was the pinnacle of parental sacrifice, turning itself into a feathery juice box for its chicks. It symbolized piety, selflessness, and deep misunderstanding of biology. Finally, let's talk about the colors and poses again, because the animal and how it's depicted matter. A lion rampant means aggression. A lion couched means nobility at rest. A lion gourdant, looking directly at you, means I see you. I know what you did. Same with eagles. An eagle displayed is screaming dominance. An eagle rising? Hope and power. An eagle close? I am trying not to get involved. Each detail, pose, color, direction, number of heads, meant something. Or at least it used to. Over time, heraldry got more crowded. Symbolic meanings overlapped, and by the 17th century, most people were just winging it while trying to impress their in-laws. But still, every snorting beast, feathered monstrosity, or judgmental bird had a story. And you? You're lying here, wrapped in a unicorn-embroidered surcoat, pondering whether that pelican meant love or low iron. Heraldry. It's never just a picture. You wake up in a room that's oddly vibrant. There's red on the walls, blue on the floor, gold, silver, green, and black in almost every possible combination. You look down. You're wearing what can only be described as the aftermath of a medieval clown fight. Scarlet sleeves, a blue surcoat, a gold sash, and something green that's probably supposed to be a belt but feels more like a snake with ambitions. Congratulations! You've entered the world of heraldic colors. And unlike the sad, dusty palettes of actual medieval clothing, think mud, oatmeal, and we ran out of dye again, heraldic colors are bold. On purpose. Because if you're charging into battle with 100 other chainmail-clad optimists, you'd better make sure everyone knows which team you're tragically loyal to. Welcome to tinctures, the official colors, metals, and furs of heraldry. Not just pretty paint, but deeply symbolic, weirdly codified, and often contradictory bits of medieval color theory. Yes, color had rules. And meanings. And rules about the meanings. And, because this is the Middle Ages, some of those meanings changed depending on who you asked, which century you were in, and whether or not a French bishop had recently eaten spoiled fish. So before we go any further, hit the like button and subscribe, only if you genuinely enjoyed dozing off to in-depth medieval color psychology delivered by a suspiciously sarcastic narrator. Drop a comment with the time and place you're tuning in from. And tell me your favorite heraldic color. Bonus points if it matches your pajamas. Right. Let's look at the basic ingredients. There are 2 metals, 5 colors, and a handful of furs. No, not actual furs, don't get excited. We'll get to those weird snow leopard polka dots in a moment. Let's begin with the metals. Or equals gold or yellow. Argent equals silver or white. These were considered precious, noble, and shiny, ideal for catching the eye of both allies and the guy about to stab you. Gold meant generosity, nobility, and prestige. In practice, it meant I'm important, possibly bankrupt, and definitely allergic to subtlety. Silver or white symbolized peace, purity, and truth. It was a flex, like wearing all white at a medieval barbecue. Look at me. Untarnished. Unbothered. Probably lying. Then come the colors. Gules equals red. Azure equals blue. Vert equals green. Sable equals black. Purple equals purple. Starting with gules, red. Red is the color of war, courage, and regret. It says, I fight. I bleed. I refuse to wear anything subtle. Red was extremely popular, like medieval Pepsi logo levels of popular. Knights painted it on their shields to intimidate. Ladies embroidered it into banners to show allegiance. And red dye was expensive, so it doubled as a look how rich and angry I am statement. Next, azure, or blue. The color of loyalty, truth, and melancholy ballads about lost causes. Blue said, I'm pious. I'm trustworthy. And yes, I overthink things. It was also associated with the Virgin Mary, so slapping blue on your coat of arms was like saying, I'm good. Holy good. Please ignore my tax fraud. Then there's vert, green. Rare, earthy, and slightly chaotic. It symbolized hope, joy, and freedom, but also smelled faintly of forest crimes and questionable herbal remedies. Green wasn't as common in early heraldry, partly because green pigment was unstable and prone to fading, just like your commitment to your new diet. Now for sable, black, elegant, grim, moody. Also hard to see in a thunderstorm. Black meant constancy, wisdom, and sorrow. But let's be honest, it mostly meant I want to look like a bat. If your arms had a black background, you were probably trying to intimidate someone or mourn your seventh cousin for tax reasons. Last on the main color roster is purple. Purple was rare, expensive, and deeply symbolic. It meant sovereignty, justice, and divine authority. It also meant your tailor probably hated you. Purple was technically allowed in heraldry, but it was used sparingly. It was like wearing a crown made of jelly beans, majestic but confusing. Now, let's talk rules. Because heraldry had one big one. Don't put metal on metal. Don't put color on color. This was the law of tincture. It meant you shouldn't, for example, put gold on silver or red on blue. Why? Because the contrast would be terrible, and some poor squire wouldn't be able to tell if he's aiming at a friend or a fashionable corpse. So, gold and silver go on colors. Colors go on gold and silver. That's it. Simple, right? Until it's not. Because people broke the rule. Often. Like kings, queens, bishops, and entire nations. Sometimes because they didn't know better. Sometimes because they were rebels. Mostly because they didn't care and figured the scribes would deal with it later. Now, just when you thought this couldn't get any weirder, we introduce furs. There are two main ones, ermine and vair. Ermine is a white background with little black tail-like shapes that look like someone stabbed a paw print. It symbolized dignity, purity, and I am wearing a rodent and proud of it. Royal robes were often lined with ermine. So putting it on a coat of arms was like photoshopping yourself into a throne room and saying, yes, I belong here. Then there's vair. This one looks like a checkerboard of blue and white bell shapes, allegedly inspired by squirrel pelts stitched together back to back. Yes, squirrels. Because apparently, nothing says nobility like rodents in coordinated patterns. There were variants of vair, counter-vair, potent, counterpotent. Because medieval people looked at a basic design and thought, how can I make this more complicated and harder to draw? And then, because apparently we didn't have enough visual chaos, there were combinations, party per fess, per pale, per bend sinister, quarterly, and so on. These weren't dance moves. They were ways of splitting your shield into different sections, to cram in more colors, animals, and symbols without violating the rules of tincture. It was like medieval collage art, but with more screaming. And meanings? Oh, the meanings. They said things like, red and gold, you're brave and generous. Blue and silver, you're loyal and peaceful. Black and green, you're moody and outdoorsy. Purple and gold, you probably think you're a god. But let's be honest, a lot of people just pick what looked cool. And then there were contradictions. One book would say azure means wisdom. Another would say it means sadness. One herald might say green is the color of Venus. Another might say it's the color of plague recovery and luck in dice games. So yes, there was symbolism. But there was also a lot of guesswork, vanity, and design by committee. And you, wrapped in your red and purple sleep tunic, might be nobility. Or you might be a jester with delusions of grandeur. The line was thin and covered in embroidered squirrels. So next time you see a knight with a gold lion on a red field or a silver eagle on a black background, know that he's not just trying to look intimidating. He's communicating in a bizarre, visual language that only 5 guys in a dusty monastery could fully interpret without arguing. Heraldry. It's color theory, fashion, politics, and identity, all on a shield. And yet somehow, it still looks better than most modern logos.